Okay, it is another volume of answering your questions, and if it's not your questions, it's somebody else's questions. So basically, we are answering questions. Here we go. What is going on in China that makes that country so prone to diseases? Is it the way they market foods? Okay, so I'm going to unpack this because I think I see a fallacy in, I don't know the name of the fallacy, but in the question itself. What is going on in China that makes that country so prone to diseases? Well, I'm going to need to see research on that, because from my worldview, from knowing where diseases originate from and knowing different diseases in different countries, I immediately push back and say, I don't think China is very much different from other major nations of the world in having more or less diseases. So in that question, we have to make sure that what we're assuming is correct. I think we're starting with an unprovable assumption, and that's probably the bigger lesson in this question, is be very careful that your worldview isn't being shaped by what's going on immediately in your life and what you see. Remember, what you know about the world comes from what you're exposed to, and we're exposed to a pandemic that originated in China, and we're exposed to what the information we get from the people around us and the media. So not just in this case, be very careful that how you think about the world is backed up on reality and not just what you're being shown by the media. For example, if the media focuses on one thing, you may think it's the most predominant thing that happens all the time. If the media is all about one place in the world, you would think that has a disproportionate effect on the rest of world politics or something like that. So it has all been, for the last 6 months, all about disease from China. But that doesn't mean, just because we see it all the time on the media, it doesn't mean China has more diseases. We need the evidence, okay? So whenever an expert or whenever your source of information like the media is telling you something, always wonder what's the reality of the situation in other parts or comparatively. So we would ask ourselves, what about diseases in other countries? Well, let's just say so China has some major diseases. SARS outbroke there. That's like the COVID. It's another coronavirus, okay? But then in the Middle East, MERS, which is another coronavirus, outbroke, okay? In the United States, we have some serious diseases that outbreak every single year. You may not have heard about them because they don't necessarily get the media attention. But we have listeria outbreaks, which I believe is a bacteria. We have E. coli outbreaks. Literally hundreds of people in the U.S. die because of food diseases in the way the United States markets and prepares food. And if we look around the world, literally millions of people are dying every year with malaria. So the biggest disease killer isn't from China at all. Now, that being said, where do diseases come from? And a lot of the times. And you are correct on the second half. Is it the way people market food? Yes. Okay. Food and or animals. Many diseases jump from animals to people. So if your country has more animal diversity and the people are more interacting with animals, the more people interact with animals, the more there's the possibility for diseases. So what we get is Ebola in Western Africa. That's where Ebola is, and there's interaction with wild animals, and there's more of a chance of getting the diseases. And we believe that this coronavirus, the current COVID-19, did jump from animals to people in the Chinese Wuhan area. Okay? It could be the way the food was marketed in certain of these cities. It could very well be. No matter how you prepare food, there is danger of contamination. For example, mad cow disease in, I think, England, at least Europe, possibly England, the way they were making and feeding their cows led to mad cow disease, which hasn't gone to humans, but it could. The E. coli and listeria breakouts in the United States is how the food is handled and processed, okay? And that's one of the reasons why some of the strongest government regulations in the United States is how to process food that could possibly be dangerous. So the answer is yes. there's a lot of diseases that are going to jump from animals to people because of handling food, but also malaria and Ebola and rabies aren't diseases that come from food. That comes from just animal interaction and malaria with mosquito interaction. And number 3, I haven't seen the numbers that said China is more prone to animal outbreaks than other countries. I haven't seen those numbers, but if I were to guess, I would think that the United States is a lot less prone to animal outbreak because we are not in an a latitude zone. We're very north, and the more north you get, the less insects and animals and biodiversity there is. So the U.S. has very few species of animals compared to a place of equatorial Africa, India, Southeast Asia, or even China. So there's just so fewer animals and insects and stuff like that in the United States. So when you're closer to the equator, the warmer areas, there's so much more life that can harbor diseases. Also, a lot of the human diseases come from farming from thousands of years ago. If you're interested, like smallpox, similar to chickenpox, similar to cowpox, avian flu, a lot of diseases happened and started when when the humans lived in close proximities 5,000-10,000 years ago with animals. So that's an interesting side on that. Further research, everybody should learn about rabies because you can definitely get it in the United States, and if you get it, you die. If you think you have it and you get the vaccines, you live. If you just get infected, you will die. Rabies. Malaria is more on the equator area. Not all the time, though. Where there's mosquitoes, and if it hasn't been eradicated, malaria is the #1, I believe, disease killer every single year. And Ebola, because it is so contagious and so deadly that sometimes, Ebola is the kind of disease people make movies about. So you might want to look into how deadly and how contagious Ebola is. Okay. It seems as though right now the pandemic that we are going through is similar to the pandemic of 1918. Do you think this is some kind of gene replication that is going on every 100 years or something made in a lab, ? So the answer is no and yes, or yes and no in the order, okay? It is very similar to the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. Do you think it's some kind of gene replication? No. These are specific viruses that exist in nature, okay? We're very, very familiar of what they look like and their genomes and their DNA, okay? I would assume that our scientists would be able to tell if something was manufactured. There'd be like footprints or fingerprints on the genes, so I don't think it's manufactured, but I think what you're doing is picking up on every 100 years or so, we're going through epidemics, and I say that's based on probability. I think you're picking up the probability, okay? So there's something called a 100-year flood zone, where if you live by a river, and they say basically, there's a probability that every 100 years you're going to get a flood that's going to destroy your house. For most of the time, the river is fine. And if you're living up on a hill, there's a 0% chance you will ever get hit by the flood. That would be a 1,000 or a 10,000-year flood. And what they're saying there is the probability of something happening within 100 years is pretty certain. It might not, but it's a very low probability. It seems to me, looking back at the history of plagues and pandemics, that just existing in the world with movement and trade leads us to this 100-year or 200-year probability of there's going to be a big disease that hits people such that we notice it. The mortality of what people are dying from it will hit every 100 or 200 years. And we have a lot of not a lot, but we have a couple things that could be put into the mix. The flu is one of those. Normally the flu is just the flu, and it is deadly, but it's not unbelievably contagious or deadly. But every 100 years you get a strain of the flu because the flu mutates, and there's many different types of the flu. Every 100 years you get a strain of the flu that really is more contagious and more deadly. The last one was 1918, but there's been others afterwards. There was the swine flu was almost the same flu as 1918, and it came around in the 2000s, almost 100 years later. Not a lot of people died from the swine flu because a lot of people were immune to that specific strain of flu plus vaccines. But it was literally the same one almost as the Spanish flu. And the plague comes around every couple hundred years. You heard about the big one in Europe and China in the 1300s. But that plague has come around every couple hundred years and wiped out cities if it got a hold, okay? So it's just a probability. And then the idea, this coronavirus, well, If you just take coronavirus, the whole family of it, there's SARS, MERS, COVID-19. So we could see these coronavirus has been around a lot. I'm saying it's just probability that this is something humans have dealt with for ever since we have cities. We've dealt with every 100 years, every 200 years, we get some sort of disease that kills enough people to be very, very notable. And I would say it's probably, yes, getting faster because of world interaction, but also we're getting at a time that maybe it won't get as faster because we have vaccines and better medical treatment. So it might not be hit as hard. But no, I think it's probability-wise, that's just human existence. Every 100 or a couple hundred years, we have to deal with a plague or a pandemic. Vocabulary, the flu, yearly. Spanish flu, N1H1, I believe it was. Very, very virulent, very powerful flu. Probability, chances of something happening. And further research, look into that Spanish flu. It is very similar. Even though COVID is a different virus, the way it works is very similar to the flu. Okay, what historical event is most like the pandemic that we are in today? Based on that event, what did the world do to fix it? That is a simple answer. The Spanish flu of the 1918s, 1919s, it is absolutely the most similar, okay? We're both in the 1918s, 19s, 20s. There were U.S. cities. U.S. had made the switch to most people living in cities. The flu is the most closest virus disease to the COVID, which is a coronavirus. They are very similar on how they spread, the transmissible rates. The death rates are similar, although coronavirus is more. Although Spanish flu was a deadly, deadly flu, coronavirus is a little bit more, but not of multiple orders of magnitudes. They're well within the same ballpark. What it does to the body is similar, even though it is different. The flu really does, the coronavirus affects a lot more things in the body, so the mechanism is very much different, but the end result seems very similar in the sense of pneumonia and attacking the lungs and possibly the heart. The incubation times, the symptoms, all very similar. They are not the same, but they are the closest, and it's within 100 years. So it is the most like it. There, you can't look at anything else. Based on that event, what did the world do to fix it? Well, they did not get a vaccine. Okay, so let's talk about what the similarities. Socially distancing, wearing masks, not hanging out with people. In the Spanish flu, the more isolated people became, the less people got infected, and the less people died because less people were infected. And you get washing hands, coughing into your elbow. It spreads the same, okay, by little infected droplets coming out of your face holes and going into your face holes. So anything you can do to keep infected air droplets out of you, that's what people did in the 1918s. They knew about the flu. The flu's around every year. So that in 1918s, they were like, it's a worse flu, and they did that. The places that isolated and shut down a little had less deaths. The places that didn't. So that's what we're looking at. That's why we went immediately to shut down everything and isolate. Okay, so we're trying to learn from history, although it has some very interesting economic effects nowadays that it didn't, because other things are different, like the interconnected and the razor's edge of capitalism. So shutting down nowadays is going to have some really powerful effects, for good or for bad. I don't think there's any good of shutting down economically. So that they didn't take that into that didn't happen too much in the 1918s, the economic effects, but the disease effects is very, very similar. Now, what can we do nowadays that they couldn't in 1918? Well, we can get a vaccine. And so the first thing is the flu comes around and changes every single year. So even if they could work on vaccines back then, it would be too late. But see, the coronavirus, as of right now, doesn't change that much. So we are very quickly working on a vaccine. This is something we can do now that they couldn't do back in 1918. And the vaccine, if it's successful, could be able to get rid of the virus if we can vaccinate everyone, or at least enough, so people have immunity and the virus dies out. So we're doing the vaccine. That's what we're doing differently nowadays, the major difference. Further research, look up how vaccines work. Question: when do you think the virus will be 90% gone? My answer is there's two answers. Number one, when basically enough people get it that it dies out by itself, and that would be the world getting herd immunity. And it is possible if the virus doesn't mutate and stays by itself and everyone really gets it, and then it won't be able to spread. The spreadability of a virus is called R0, R0. Okay, the R0 means how many people do you infect with it. If you infect one person, the virus will stay around, R1. If you infect two people, so everyone who has it infects two, the virus will grow exponentially, R2. Anything less than R1 means that the virus will die out, and if it doesn't mutate, it will go away. Okay, so this, with social distancing, this virus is a very low R. With social distancing and lockdown, you can have the virus below 1, and it will die out. But you're going to end your economy as you know it. We don't know if social distancing with economy, with business, will take it below R1. So, when will it be 90% gone? Well, if we wait and lock down everything, it'll be 90% gone in a very, it's going to be tough. Because some people will not lock down and it'll stick around. If everyone gets it, and the the spread ability is very low because people hopefully can't get infected again with it, then we have what's known as herd immunity, and it'll die out. This would take about a year, maybe a little more. But this is really bad herd immunity naturally because people are going to die. Millions of people are going to die because everyone's going to get it. Or it could very well be gone by like January because of a vaccine. Then you would have vaccine immunity. We're looking at tests. Hundreds of vaccines are in the works right now. We're looking at tests in July and August. And tests, and then rolling out the vaccines December, January. And then we will create the immunity. The R will go less than 1 and it'll die out. A couple things have to be true for that. 1, we have to find a vaccine that works fairly well. 2, we have to get people to accept taking the vaccine. And 3, the virus can't mutate to be in forms that aren't hit by the vaccine. So there's a lot of ifs there. Further research for this. So best case scenario with least amount of deaths, 90% gone, February. Just my guess. 2021. That's my guess. If all the good happens. Otherwise it could be longer. Further research, just looking for COVID vaccines and see where it is. Massive human testings are going to happen in July, the last I heard. So why don't you look that up? Okay, question. How many people were unemployed during the Great Depression? ? How does that compare to today? Well, with not a lot of research into it, I tend to remember the Great Depression unemployment was over 20%, maybe 25%. Some vocabulary for this, unemployment rate. That means the percentage of people who are of working age and want to work. So there's the people who are working age, want to work, who can't find a job. It doesn't take into account young people or people who don't want to find a job or retired people, stuff like that, okay? There's always going to be some unemployment, okay? People get fired, people quit, blah, blah, blah. People are going from school, college, high school to a job, but they might not have a job. There's always going to be about 4% of US people unemployed. Okay, that's not bad. You can't get rid of it. They're going to get a job. It's just transitional unemployment, okay? So anything over 4%, that means there's people who really want jobs that aren't going to find it anytime soon. So 4% is your lowest, 10% is bad, and 20 and 25% is unreal bad. Great Depression, 20, 25%. Today, 13, 14%, worst unemployment in recent history, okay? It's bad from an unemployment rate. But how else does it compare? The Great Depression was capitalism breaking. The banks went bankrupt, stock market went away, the prices were all over the place, sometimes too expensive, sometimes people were out, sometimes too low, believe it or not. People were out of work. It was the broken capitalism. Today, people are unemployed because literally the government shut down jobs, okay? There is no systemic problems with the banking system, the housing system, the stock market, the global supply lines. getting and growing food, making manufactured goods, everything was running okay-ish. Actually, better than okay. There might have been some bubbles, and they were on the edge of falling off a cliff, but they weren't. So the unemployment is because the governments of each state shut down business. That's the biggest difference. It's a government-enacted unemployment. So it's a possibility that it's not going to be easy, but the recovery could start now. The more businesses open up, we look for the unemployment numbers to go less and less and less. It's going to take a few years to get back to where we were 6 months ago, but the spike of unemployment wasn't because the system was breaking, it's because we shut the system off. And it's not going to be a light switch. It was shutting it off. We went from 4% unemployment to unbelievable in 2 months because the government shut off the light switch. But now we are warming up. It's like when you turn a stove on that's not a gas stove. It takes a little while to warm up again. Or if it's, I don't even know if they use these anymore. But when you turn the gym lights on, it takes a while for them to warm up. It's not instantaneous. That's what it's going to be like turning the economy back on. And we have to avoid another face punch, okay? And then it will just warm up nicely over the next 1 or 2 years. And so for your further research, that's how the Great Depression is compared to the unemployment of today. Further research, look up unemployment insurance and the CARES Act. Federal government did the CARES Act. States have unemployment insurance. That's a big difference too between the Great Depression and today. Like technically, if the states got their act together, and I know it's a little rough for the states to do things correctly, but those people who became unemployed because the states shut down the businesses are supposed to get unemployment insurance for up to a half year. They're supposed to get money so they can keep running. Now, whether the businesses can stay in business, that's another story, but the straight up employees are supposed to be getting unemployment insurance doubled because of the Federal CARES Act. So that's a big difference too. And that's why if we can turn this light back on, people can get back to work with hopefully not necessarily losing their houses and losing their whole life savings because they were getting unemployment insurance. That's not to say it's pretty. That's only to say hopefully we can avoid a Great Depression, even though the unemployment numbers are similar. Okay, what happened with the Chernobyl reactor disaster in the Ukraine in 1980s? Okay, well, definitions. The Ukraine is a country that was part of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, so everything was under control of the capital city Moscow in the Soviet Union. Nuclear reactors, how they work. Nuclear reactors, power plants, make electricity. They make electricity by boiling water. And the water and steam turns big turbines and creates electricity. You can turn, as long as you have turning motion, you get electricity. Now, how do you get turning motion? You could use it as a waterfall to get turning motion to get electricity. You can burn coal to get heat, to boil water, to get steam, to turn things, to get electricity. In a nuclear reaction, nuclear fission, the radioactive decay of uranium and other, maybe, I don't know if they use plutonium, but it's probably uranium. Most of them are. I don't know if they use plutonium, but most are uranium. Nuclear decay creates heat. So if you don't blow things up to get electricity. You just get big chunks of uranium that is making radioactive decay, and it's hot. The heat makes water hot, gets steam, turns things, and you get electricity. Now the thing is, there's enough nuclear uranium that unless you slow it down with control rods, it will melt. It'll get so hot, the steam will blow up, and the nuclear material will just melt. It's called a meltdown. So you've got to control the radioactive decay. Now, what happened in Chernobyl, one of the reactors, they were doing tests to see if they could withstand a power outage. And there was a whole miscommunication, and everything went to poop. And what they did, they lost control during their tests, and they couldn't get control back. So the uranium material superheated, caused a huge steam explosion because all that pressure, and maybe even other things exploded and lit on fire. So it was the heat of the radioactive material. Now, with this explosion, it sends radioactive uranium particles just into the air, and it gets blown around into the surrounding area, okay? And then the radioactive particles land on the ground and in the water, and they stay there because they're still radioactive uranium. It's not like when you make a bomb and it turns into something else. All this dirty, dirty uranium that is still decaying got spread within miles of the Chernobyl reactor and the town that was built up next to the reactor. And in fact, even the cloud of radiation material got blown to different countries too. Today, it's those uranium particles and radioactive material that is still releasing radiation. You can't eat the stuff that's grown around there. The animals are exposed to it all the time. There's certain places where there's like no material at all, and you can literally go and walk and see and go on a tour of Chernobyl. And then they have it roped off. There's areas of high radioactivity where if you stay in there for a long time, you're going to get poisoned. People still work in the area doing stuff, I think, with a different power plant off to the side, but they still have to take precautions, and they have to have radiation meters and all of that sort of thing. And by the way, it's not going to be habitable. See, there's a difference. The bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, they did not spread all this dirty, I mean, they blew up the cities hardcore within a nanosecond. But they didn't spread all this dirty radioactive material that will be there for hundreds, if not thousands of years, poisoning the environment. And so you see Nagasaki and Hiroshima are built up again as cities today because you can live there, because they don't have the deadly radioactive material that's just been put into the ground all over. And that was the Chernobyl reactor disaster. The amount of life lost is actually very low comparatively to a nuclear bomb. It was within the hundreds, I think, or maybe even less than hundreds. And the amount of people that were poisoned by radiation was within the thousands. Still, orders of magnitude less than nuclear bombs, but the area was poisoned for basically forever. And you can look further research. I'll try to remember to link a Chernobyl PowerPoint in the description. I'll try to remember that. Okay, how would you fix the economy after the New York shutdown? Simple answer: open things up safely. Okay? You want more people working? Get more business. Nothing has fundamentally changed. New Yorkers want to buy stuff. New Yorkers still have money because many people who lost their jobs are getting unemployment insurance. It's only been a couple months. Some of these small businesses won't go out of business forever. Some have, and that's the cost of shutting down. Safety, health, virus-wise, is the positives of shutting down, but the cost is some small businesses are gone now forever, and those families have closed up. Other small businesses have made it through, and they need business to get going. So how would you fix the economy? You don't need to do anything major if you get businesses open as fast as possible while being safe. Because the people still have money, the businesses still have things to sell, and capitalism will go back to where it was before, okay? There's still going to be more people unemployed because the businesses opening up will not hire back everybody, but they will hire back a lot of people, okay? And once you get the money flowing, every dollar that gets spent again and again and again, and it keeps the economy going. How would you fix the economy? Get it? Just let the businesses open. The shutdown hasn't killed the demand and the supply. It's hurt everybody, but it hasn't killed the businesses, the majority, yet. So now is the time to do things safely and get people spending their money again.
And I know it cannot last, but at last I can finally see